Well, they did it the hard way, but England have qualified and Australia are going home. You're watching the World Cup Mood Board with Jarrod Kimber for 99.94.
And England respond. Not quite this time. It should be taken. It is at all. And it picked out the map. More pressure on. Oh no! Go out! Cross, he's got it over finally.
Well, we spent all that money on the cutting up that package only to accidentally swipe back to me. But it's fine. Here we are. Yeah, as I said, England are into the semi-finals. Goodbye, Australia. After the easy yet not exactly emphatic win against Afghanistan and then the shock against Ireland, England have been, I suppose, much more as advertised. At least they've played roughly the sort of cricket that we expected for them against New Zealand and Sri Lanka. They've now essentially come through 2 knockout games, which means that they're experienced at that sort of thing. And they're not yet playing the kind of explosive cricket that we kind of expect from England. But they're in the World Cup semi-finals, and it hasn't really been that kind of World Cup anyway. So you can't really expect England to have gone any differently than anyone else. They're all playing on the same pitches with the same balls. So in the past, this is definitely the sort of game historically that England would have lost at a World Cup. High pressure, batting second on a thrice used pitch. Sri Lanka with nothing to lose. Chris Silverwood, their former coach, trying to get some revenge. Of course, nothing would go completely right for him because this is Australia. Not to mention that Dawid Malan got injured halfway through, which essentially gave them 10 batters, or I don't know, 10 and a half batters, depending on how you look at it. But England kept their cool. Maybe is kept their cool the right phrase? England didn't collapse completely, I suppose is the right one. But twice in this game, England actually worked their way back into it. The first one was when Sri Lanka got off to a flying start with the bat. And the second one was obviously when they were in their chase and they lost a bunch of wickets in that sort of late middle period there. It was Ben Stokes, whose batting has drawn a little bit of criticism at time in this tournament, who finished that off for them with just a competent innings, I suppose is the best way of putting it. England will now most probably face India in the second of the 2 semi-finals in Adelaide on Thursday. And they'll be happy, if nothing else, that it'll be, I'm assuming, a fresh pitch. So England pulled back, England's bowling pulled the game back. So it is worth mentioning this. Sri Lanka had 65 for 1 after just 65 for 1 after 7 overs. And Mark Wood's first over went for 17. Sanka was 41 off 23, which probably would have given him a nosebleed considering everything that's been going on with him, including 4 sixes. I think on a pitch where chasing anything around 160 looked like it might be tricky, and turned out it would have been very tricky, that was a huge start from Sri Lanka at that point. But then England really changed the game. Bowling has not really been England's strongest suit in T20 cricket specifically, especially since the white ball revival began. They've really backed their batting so much more. But it was a little bit different today. Sri Lanka's early onslaught meant that England bowled 5 consecutive... after Sri Lanka got away to that great start, England bowled 5 consecutive overs that went at less than a run a ball. Rashid and Curran took the wickets. Rashid and Curran went at 6 runs and over and 4 runs and over. And Curran took the wicket of Dhananjaya. Moeen Ali, his over... I'll start all this again. Rashid's over went for 6. Curran's went for 4, took the DDS's wicket. Moeen his over went for 5. Stokes went for 4. That was a really good over by Stokes at the end, sort of building on all that pressure. And he took Asalanka as well. And then Livingston's over went for 5. England cycled through their bowlers, maybe in a slightly less, a slightly more natural way. Again, Joss Buttler is not quite as matchup dependent as Owen Morgan was, a slightly different way of looking at it. But they leaned quite heavily on their on their spin, with Curran and Stokes obviously coming in and bowling off-pace deliveries as well. In that 5-over period, Sri Lanka failed to find a boundary once, going for 31 balls between boundaries. Glad Charlie must have noted that down, because at one stage I was thinking, I can't even remember their last boundary. So having been... so Nasanka was 41 after 7 overs, and eventually he was dismissed for 67 in the 16th. No other Sri Lankan batter made over 22, however. So he did actually make the runs for them. Eventually, they would make 76 for 7 in their final 13 overs, 25 for 5 in their last 5. Half of England's overs went at less than a run a ball. Adil Rashid was probably the best bowler, and I think it's probably fair to say that he hasn't been as good this tournament. Partly that could just be conditions as well. They might not have suited him as well. But he's a wrist spinner in Australia on big ground. You expect him to do a little bit better than he has. But he was outstanding. He got his first wicket of the tournament. He did have at least one catch dropped off him earlier. But he finished with 1 for 16 from his 4 overs. And he now has equal with Chris Jordan as England's leading men's wicket taker. So there's a fun fact for you. But I did think I thought it was really interesting the way that England pulled it back. But I'm just going to talk about Sam Curran directly here because I've got a ton of stuff on him. Someone asked the other day what was going on with Sam Curran in the chat, and obviously didn't get a huge opportunity to look it up. So I really wanted to see what has changed with his bowling specifically. If I told you that Sam Curran had changed his length profile, you'd probably look at me weirdly and then maybe slowly walk away. But each bowler has a kind of a profile of how often they try each length. And there's always a slight variation in this from year to year. The ball might swing more one year, so you pitch it up, or you might play on a specific ground, or all these sorts of things play a part. However, I think we can tell in this particular one, you can see the grey lines are his 3 previous years that we have a lot of data on. And then the pink line is this year so far. There's absolutely no doubt that Sam Curran has changed his length completely. Let's start with the full balls. He's bowled a lot of full tosses, but that's because he's bowling a lot more Yorkers. That's a fairly normal thing to have happen to most bowlers when they're going for that. And you can also see from probably just looking at the data that it's possible that quite often when he does miss his Yorker, it is probably full. But either way, he's certainly bowling a lot of those. But then if you come down all the way to the other end, you'll also see that he's bowling a higher percentage of short balls than he ever has before. This is, for a medium, fast southpaw swinger, it's a bit odd to suddenly become a teeth and toes bouncer specialist, right? It's not really what you would expect. This is the pink line is more what you would expect from a bowler like Mitchell Starc, not Junior Curran. And this kind of change is not generally pitch dependent, as in he's taken the pitch out of the equation with making these changes. So you would say that he's clearly changed his method and he's going with it. And a part of that must be because he's bowling more at the death. But and he has been hidden a lot in the death in his career. But I still believe that he's made a conscious effort to change this, because it's not even just when he's bowling at the death we're seeing this. If you have a look at his, this was put up, I think, about halfway through his spell today. You can see that it's a complete even spread, really, between where he's bowled his balls, from short all the way through to, over pitching right at the top there. And he's also, if you have a look at his line, and I haven't gone into that in full analysis yet, but you can see he hasn't bowled many wide Yorkers. He's basically bowled pretty much straight at the stumps and just varied his length very consistently, which I found very, very interesting. But if you look at this is his entire career, the amount of the percentage of overs he's bowled at the death. See, he kind of hovers around 20 to 25%. He had 1 year in 2018. Well, I don't think he played a lot of cricket. So that's a bit of an outlier. And then you come all the way through to this World Cup. And suddenly he's bowling almost 50% of his deliveries at the death in this World Cup, which is a huge jump up from where he's been in his career. And I don't think I don't think anyone would have really expected that coming in for him to have, the impact he's had, but also to be bowling that many balls. he's bowled 40 balls at the death so far in this World Cup, and he has an economy rate of 4.8 and a bowling average of less than that. When bowling at the death, he's this little dot far left bottom hand corner that I forgot to put a face on. This is very small sample size. There aren't that many players who have bowled a lot at the death. I think Ngarava from Zimbabwe, off the top of my head, might have bowled the most deliveries at the death. He's got a fantastic record as well. I think he's averaging about 14 and a half, going at less than a run a ball. So he's been really, really good. But Sam Curran has been absolutely incredible so far at the death. And if you look at this graph and you see top right-hand corner, someone standing out, that's Paul Barry McCarthy of Ireland, who's not had a great death bowling tournament. Yes, Sam Curran being the best death bowler in this tournament and is partly down to small sample sizes. There's no doubt about that. The only other thing I would add, though, is you wouldn't have even expected him to be in this conversation beforehand, let alone have these kind of figures. So the whole thing is really, really quite interesting. And I think it might work in this tournament, or maybe in the semi-final or the final, someone gets hold of him, because eventually someone's going to have to score off him at the death, because that just hasn't been happening yet. The only other thing I would say is that he it'd be interesting to see if this is how he's used going ahead, because he doesn't profile as a normal death bowler, but he is, I suppose, in some ways very similar to Arshdeep Singh, a slightly different sized bowler, but left arm more medium fast. It'd be interesting to see if those two have sort of worked out methods that work for them that maybe other left arm bowlers can come across as well. All right, moving on to England's batting. Coming into this World Cup, it was England's batting that was supposed to win them the games, and I suppose it has, in that they've won games. But just as that Sri Lanka batted in this innings with two halves, the power play and then the rest, in fact, across both innings, the power play went for 124 for one, so 10.3 runs and over, and the other overs went at 5.8 runs and over. So traditionally, when I see a game like that, I just say that means the air has gone out of the ball. Which means that, and we see this, it's probably something you see more in Asia than other places, but it's something that happens a lot on used pitches. Once the ball gets a little bit soft on a used pitch, it just gets to the point that you can't hit the boundaries anymore with it. And this game was a perfect example of that. And fair play to England if they worked that out early on and attacked in that power play, because that's what set up their win in the end. So Sri Lanka scored a 54 for one in their power play, and England was 70 without loss. Also helps to be without loss. Alex Hales was very clinical. I think they knew that spin was going to be the biggest threat, and so they went after Kumara and Rajitha, whose 3 overs in the power play went for 45. Butler made 28 from 23, and Hales was 47 from 30, and England got well ahead of the rate, which is probably what got them in the World Cup semi-finals. Just an aside on this, for those who may not remember, the Champions Trophy in 2017, where England came into that tournament favourite and lost to Pakistan in the semi-final, that was a used pitch. It's a bit odd to have a used pitch for a final, or a semi-final, but anyway, it was a used pitch. And because of that, England started really slowly, couldn't get it away, and then as the ball got softer and softer, they just never got into that game at all. And so I'm not saying that they've learned something from that particular game, but it does show that it's not just them going out there and smashing it. They do think about these things a little bit more, and I think in 2017 they probably weren't at that level to think those things through. Or also they batted in the first innings, so maybe they just didn't have a chance. But very, very, very interesting there. The other key factor, of course, in England's batting was Ben Stokes, whose slightly plodding style in this format makes it an odd fit for the England team, particularly when they already have Dawid Malan. But today, that was the kind of game that you really want someone like Ben Stokes for, despite the fact that he's not really played a lot of T20 cricket and has a modest record in it. He was selected because he is Ben Stokes, right? And he has a big match temperament. And he also, in those sorts of situations we have seen before, he's very good at that sort of almost automatic run scoring thing. So he's an anchor who you would hope can eventually hit you a lot of sixes as well. And even if England haven't seen that a lot, because he can bowl, that means that it's going to actually work quite well for him. If you have a look, when England's World Cup was on the line, Brooke, Livingston, Moeen were all unable to actually make 10 runs between them. They're all in that team to hit. And of course, at that stage in the game, with the pitch being what it wasn't really a pitch for people who were hitters. Stokes ended up with 42 off 36, and he was the only middle order batter on either side to have more than a run a ball strike rate. So that's fun. That was the most balls Ben Stokes has ever faced in a T20 international in terms of balls, but also in terms of minutes. It'd be interesting also now with Milan likely to miss the rest of the tournament through injury. So it looked like he did a groin. I haven't got an update. I'm sure Charlie probably put it in the notes, but I missed it. But it looked like a groin when I was watching it. When we're looking, probably after the last World Cup, I was looking at these teams and how they would project out, I thought that Milan and Stokes both basically should bat at number 3, I think, in this team. And in Milan's case, probably be more of a floater. And in Stokes' case, probably come in at number 3 unless they're massively ahead of the game and they want a hitter to come in. One of the reasons is that Stokes can actually score all right in the power play, but there's no point opening with him because England just have so many better options. And in Milan's case, I'm not sure where else you would put him in the order if he doesn't bat at number 3. This might be the best lineup that they have available for them. Having said that, in this particular tournament, having Stokes and Milan in that middle order, depending on what the pitches do over the next week or so, it may not be quite the same. But I would say that I think they're playing in Adelaide, so it should be a little bit better than some of the other wickets that we've seen at times in this World Cup. But it will be interesting to see if not having that second anchor on their side is a problem when they get to the actual finals. All right, let's move on to Sri Lanka today. I think if you're going to go out of the tournament, you might as well take a bunch of skin under your fingernails on the way out. Sri Lanka managed to somehow make England panic, and then Australia dare to dream, I suppose, is the other way of putting it. So from that perspective, almost a dream last game of the tournament, other than the fact that they missed out on the win. We talked about Nasanka already, 67 off 45, it wasn't quite enough runs, but they had the chance of turning this into 155 plus. And as it turns out, that would have been enough. But their second half was putrid. We can talk about the pitch and we can talk about the bowlers, but they didn't really look like they were going to be able to make any runs. There was a time when I was thinking to myself, if they declared, they might not have made that much more damage here. Just on the Nasanka, though, for those who don't know, in the last 2 World Cups, he is the leading run scorer across them. Now, part of that reason is that Sri Lanka has played 1 million games. Maybe more than that at this point. So Sri Lanka's played 1 million games. So that's one of the reasons. But he's been really consistent. He's averaged over 30. I should say that I think these are all the players who've scored over 280 runs in the World Cup so far. And of those players who scored over 280 runs, he has the slowest strike rate. So I think he's at 115 and Max O'Dowd is at 116. Everyone else is, I think, just over 120. So it does tell you that while he's made a lot of runs, he just hasn't been able to score at the rate that they would have liked. Today was interesting because he started striking quite well, but couldn't continue it at all. He gave them a great, he gave them and himself a great platform. And then the team, instead of diving into a pool of runs, sort of dove off the back end of the board and back onto the concrete a little bit there. All right, go on to the bowlers. I said before, oh no, that's not what I wanted to say. No, they bowled really well, Sri Lanka. Well enough to win this game. And even though the pitch played its part, they didn't have a real, what's the best way of putting it? They didn't have a real huge chance of winning this game, especially after England starts. So again, for the bowlers to be able to pull them back in, they certainly made a chase of 142, far less simple. Hasaranga went further ahead for the most wickets in this tournament so far. Dhananjaya De Silva popped in for a couple of handy ones. Always like him doing almost anything on the field. And then Lahiro Kumara had a very good comeback after going for runs early on, really bowled well later on. And that's not mentioning Tikshana as well, whose 4 overs went for 22. This is a bowling attack that hasn't been at full strength all the way through this World Cup, and it is certainly stood up very, very well consistently. And they went out today, but this was actually, considering the start they got with the bat, and how they bowled and almost beat England, this was actually one of their better performances of the World Cup. All right, let's move on to our Sri Lanka exit interview. All right. So I thought coming into this World Cup that Sri Lanka's best case scenario was pushing for a semi-final spot at times, without really looking like they were going to get into the semi-finals. That's almost exactly what happened, which is very random and very lucky from my perspective. But I think there are a lot of other people who thought, based on the Asia Cup and just what they did in the last World Cup, that they were slightly better than that. But this is still not a very good team. And I'm going to show you a couple of things just to make my point really clear. No, that's exactly the wrong thing I wanted. That's the thing I wanted. So in the last World Cup, Sri Lanka has won 9 games and lost 7, which of course on the face of it, it's a over 500 record, so you would take that. But if you do start to drill down even slightly on it, you work out that in the first round, they've gone 5-1. And in the next part of the tournament, they've gone 2-6. So when they're playing the weaker teams, other than that upset to Namibia, they've almost swept that part of the pool when they've got to the tough side. So they really have started to struggle just a little bit. And if you go through even more and even look at the second round teams, Sri Lanka's won against UAE, Namibia, Netherlands, Bangladesh, West Indies, Ireland, and Afghanistan. And they've beaten Netherlands and Ireland twice in that. So outside of the loss against Namibia, Sri Lanka have won every game that they've been favourite for and lost every game that they were underdogs for, which does, I think that's probably the most accurate description of how they have been. This is the totals over the last 2 World Cups. So on the blue is obviously when they've won the game, and the yellow is when they've lost it. I've just done it on economy to make it a little bit easier for everyone. So you could see that they average 137 runs in the games that they lose, and that jumps up to 166 in their wins. They also average 15 runs per wickets in those losses and 32 in the wins. Now, obviously, we're expecting it to be quite low when they lose, and we're expecting it to be a big difference. The problem is that high end is not particularly high either. Even in their wins, they're not scoring particularly fast, right? So, they're not impressing that much in their wins. It's just that their bowlers are completely standing up for them. And if you look at the games here, so this is their economy by game all the way through both World Cups so far. They've had 2 games where they've scored at over 9 runs and over, and they've also had 2 games where they've scored at less than a run a ball. That's not particularly ideal. And to compare them to Pakistan, Pakistan have played less games than Sri Lanka, but they have scored at 9 runs and over 3 times, right? And I didn't pick Pakistan by accident. You're talking about a team who's played actually 6 less games than Sri Lanka altogether. And they're another side who bats slowly, right? And that is part of their game plan. And they're bowling dependent. And yet they still manage to score far quicker, far often than Sri Lanka has. Sri Lanka's best economy or runs per over in an innings is at Perth against Australia, against one of the better teams. So you can really see West Indies, Bangladesh, Ireland, Netherlands, Afghanistan, and then you've got the 2 Australias, and then you've got the games against England, South Africa, England again, and New Zealand down this other end, right? It's really clear that they are struggling to score quickly against anyone, and specifically the better teams. And if you just come in, so I've got, this is something I use more. I use it more for players than I do for teams. But this is something I do for teams where I look at the balls per boundary and the dot ball percentage. And basically, you want to be bottom left-hand corner where the top sides are, right? Those are all the sides who don't waste a lot of deliveries, and they also hit a good amount of boundaries. If you look all the way out on the right-hand side, you'll see Afghanistan and the West Indies. Those are the teams that do chew up a lot of dot balls and go for a lot of boundaries as well. And then top left-hand corner should be the strike rotators. Weirdly enough, there aren't many teams left that their main skill is strike rotating. And I think Netherlands was a team, and maybe Ireland were two teams that at times in their past were excellent strike rotators. And that would have been, I'm trying to think, that would have been where Australia might have been a couple of years ago as well. So what you have is the rest of these teams are the teams that are sort of anchor-led. You see Afghanistan's right on the edge, and you've got Zimbabwe, UAE right on the edge. Sri Lanka, if they're not going to hit boundaries, and you can see they are definitely not hitting boundaries by this metric, should definitely be in the strike rotating, right? They've got top-level players, test quality players, a long-standing, relationship with white ball cricket. If they're not going to hit boundaries, they should be rotating the strike. And if they're not going to rotate the strike, they should be hitting more boundaries. They shouldn't be in this section. Bangladesh is in this section, and Bangladesh's batting is terrible. You don't want to be anywhere near Bangladesh on a graph of T20I batting. So it really is quite bad. Their bowling unit obviously seems to be getting better all the time. And I think they've actually got other players to be able to bring in as well. With Madhushanka, I think he's quite a talent. I'll be really interested to see where he goes in the future. They've got a top order player in DDS who can bowl off spin for them. They've got a leg spinner who can hit quite well, so it gives them a little bit of depth there. They have pace, weird actions, all these different things coming through. But realistically, at the moment, it doesn't look like they can consistently score over 150. And if they can't score over 150, unless you've got Jasprit Bumrah and Rashid Khan in your bowling attack, I can't see how you are going to win games consistently. They need people who can rotate the strike or hit, or preferably both. Look, they won the Asia Cup in the middle of all this, so we know that there's still talent there. And they should be developing better players now as they have a local league. Plus, now their best players are starting to get picked up in franchise cricket again, which will help their development of their top-end players. This is not a terrible team, but to be a consistent one, capable of regularly getting into the semi-finals of the World Cup and winning over 50% of their games, their batting's just going to have to get better, right? All right, last one for today. Mohammad Nabi has stepped down as captain of Afghanistan, and he sent a letter on Twitter as well. He starts the letter with a very cheery, "Dear compatriots and cricket lovers!" ! Didn't think when I started reading that it meant that he had stepped down, but apparently it does mean that he has, and also there was some negativity in it. According to Mohammad Nabi, the team preparation for the last year was not at a level that he wanted or needed for a big tournament, and so he's going to step down as captain. And you can tell he really means it, because in the letter he uses all caps for step down and for captain, and they're also bolded. All caps and bolded. Look, unfortunately, this kind of stuff does happen a lot in Afghanistan teams, especially around big tournaments where suddenly everyone involved in Afghanistan cricket wants to have a say. Afghanistan doesn't have really well-known beat writers, certainly ones who maybe write in English, so that therefore, the vast majority of cricket fans of the cricket media / fans can read it and it can be passed around. They don't have a major beat writer at Cricinfo or Cricbuzz, as far as I'm aware. So a lot of things happen at these tournaments with Afghanistan that isn't really followed up by journalists. And I know this because in 2019, I became like a de facto beat writer for Afghanistan. I think it was at the majority of their games and reported quite heavily on them. And behind the scenes, it was absolutely crazy. Players were briefing against each other. Gulbuddin was made captain and seemed to be like a team mascot at the same time. One player went rogue and would be sent home. And there was just an unprofessional environment that culminated with the players not actually following the ICC concussion protocols, because, as Gulbuddin said, Afghanistani heads are harder than other people's heads. And what usually happens when all this is going on is the really professional players get very angry as suddenly everything that they do is questioned from above. And quite often their power is taken away as well. And you got to remember that a lot of these guys play for franchises that are very well run, and suddenly you're in a situation that is not well run. I don't know much about this particular mess. Obviously, I'm not with the team at the moment, but I'm guessing that this letter is probably one of the more professional things to come out of Afghanistani cricket at the moment. But he does end the letter with the best regards, so how can you be that upset with him? But I think it's a huge shame for Afghanistani cricket that Mohammad Nabi is not going to be captain. He has said he's going to make himself available as a player, although after saying that they weren't particularly professional, they may not want him around, and these things do happen. All right, going to take a break, and I'm going to troll through the comments, and troll's probably the wrong word, isn't it? I'm going to look through the comments and see if there's anything there that is interesting from that perspective.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
Okay, I've got some questions, and let me just... All right, so let's see what we have here. Anant says, why do teams have more pacers than spinners, even on spin-friendly pitches? Teams go for 3 spinners and 2 pacers at maximum, while on pace-friendly pitches, teams often go for an all-out pace attack. Spinners are, by definition, more limited to the parts of the games they can bowl. That's the main reason why in limited overs we see that, because, obviously in spin-friendly pitches, in test matches, we do sometimes have more spinners than pace bowlers. Spinners, quite often, not all spinners like bowling with the new ball. Not all spinners can bowl with the new ball. And the power play restrictions obviously make it tough for certain spinners as well. And then the death. If you can't spin the ball both ways at the death, or you don't have a massive advantage because of the pitch, it's very hard. So you quite often, if you do a big deep dive of spinners at the death, if you do a big deep dive on death bowlers, almost always the best bowlers with records at the death are spinners. It's usually Rashid Khan, Sunil Narayan used to be it, Ashwin, Zampa was another one that would pop up, Adil Rashid. There's lots of them. And so your thought process then is, wow, we should bowl them more. But what actually happens is, majority of times when those people have actually bowled at the death, it means that conditions have been hugely in their favour. When the conditions are not in the spinner's favour, they get absolutely hammered at the death. And so that is one of the reasons. But it's mostly just that there's not as much flexibility when it comes to spinners. And there are for certain spinners, but across the board of spinners, there isn't as much flexibility to be able to use any time during the innings. And just on a very basic level, I think that the way that white ball cricket particularly goes, there is more flexibility in what you can use your seamers for, not just within the overs, but spinners can only bowl 1, maybe 2 lengths. They don't really bowl Yorkers outside of, the odd guy who has a Yorker. And, very few of them bowl even anywhere near back of a length. So a pace bowler who's getting hit can bowl very, very full, can bowl length balls, can bowl back of the length balls, can bowl bouncers, all these different options. So there is more variety within the pace bowlers than there is spin bowlers. And then you've just got simple matchups. Unless you're lucky enough to have 4 spinners who are all world class at the same time, that all do, left arm wrist spinner, a right arm wrist spinner, an off spinner and a left arm finger spinner, it's just going to be massive overlap there. And, if the other team will just make sure that they have right hand, left hand and try and make sure that they can attack from that perspective. So that's the main reason. I suppose the other thing you might add might be the left arm seam bowling thing, which is maybe there's only so many quality spinners available anyway at any one time. Even we know how great left arm seam is, and yet it's not 50-50. We can only find so many left-handers. You can only find so many people who have the ability to rotate the ball and land it on a spot and deceive people and everything else. Rahul says, who comes in for Milan in the semi-final, Mills or Jordan? I would think it's probably a batter, isn't it? Unless I'm trying to think of any other reason. Unless they are not happy with the the all-round options that they have. I would have thought that it would be a batter who would come in for Milan. I'm trying to think who's even in the squad, but yeah, I wouldn't have thought that they would have brought a bowler in unless they think that, unless you were doing something really specific. So it's not Adelaide. Let's say if it was Perth, you might bring Mills in, for instance, at Perth, because you're like, wow, he's going to be really quick and be dangerous. But it's Adelaide. So I'm trying to remember, did Chris Jordan play for... Chris Jordan might have played for the Strikers. So maybe you look at his record at Adelaide and it's exceptional, and you go with something like that. But I don't remember him being that good for the Strikers or on anything on that. So I would think it would be a batter, but I'd have to have a look at the squads. Sorry. All right. Why are England using Mose over so sparingly when the bowling is done so good both this and the last World Cup? Well, this gets back to that first question from Anand, right? Quite often, have a look at Glenn Maxwell's figures as well, right? There's a lot of spinners, part-time spinners specifically, and you get this in Test cricket as well, who end up with incredibly good figures, right? And everyone's like, oh, you should bowl them more. Then you start to bowl them more, and they don't have good figures anymore. So when they're being bowled, in Mo's case, he's being bowled probably when either the pitch is spinning a long way or there's a bunch of left-handers, right? Which means that his figures are going to look really good. If he bowled all the time, he's probably not going to have that. Now, you could argue that he's feeling it and the ball's coming out well, you might as well try him more. That's also very fair. Generally, though, with those sorts of bowlers, that's what they've done. They would have come in with a very set plan for Moeen Ali of when he will bowl and when he won't bowl. They've got that backup with Livingston, right? And because Livingston can spin the ball in both ways, I think that gives them a real good flexibility with Moeen Ali. We know that Adil Rashid's probably going to bowl out. The other thing with Moeen Ali is, and I'm not sure if that's held up in this particular World Cup, but in general, he doesn't take as many wickets as other spinners. He's usually, his economy is fine, but he doesn't, which is weird because in Test cricket, of course, he takes a load of wickets. But in one-day cricket, he's more of a spoiler bowler, defensive type specialist. So it could also be partly that they're looking for wickets when they're doing that. But I don't think that's the case. I would think it's probably more to do with the fact that he bowls when they think he's got a favourable matchup. And that's how you get the best use out of him. This is the thing, because we don't really talk about usage rates and all these other things in cricket, we don't look at the fact that, he's got really good figures on a low usage rate. What would happen if he bowled on a high usage rate is a fair question. My guess is that at some stage in their history, England have already tried that. And I don't think I had a chat with any of the England analysts, but I had a chat with another analyst about this sort of thing before with Moeen Ali directly. And I think they said that there's no way that Moeen Ali is a 4 overs a game bowler, which is kind of what I think. I think he's like a 2.5 to 3 overs game bowler. And from that, I think that's why we've seen him bowl the way he has. Kyle says, how often do T20 bowlers tip their deliveries, prematurely giving away if they were going to bowl a slower ball or other variation? Well, this depends on exactly what you're asking. There's two different kinds of tips. There are, there's the Michael Holding bowling a bouncer off his right foot. So always starting his run up off his right foot, which I've gone back and had a look at. And Gavaskar was the one who said this, and I'm not sure it's true. Is the first thing to point out there. So there are bowlers who do that. I can't remember who it was. It was a big Sri Lankan quick who had a slower ball maybe a decade ago now. He used to cock his wrist when he was about to bowl his back of the hand slower ball, which is a natural thing if you're a leg spinner to sort of cock your wrist. But if you're doing it on a slower ball, it was really easy to see. I think it was almost just before his gather, you would just see him change it. Those are the really obvious ones. But the truth is that there's always a tip. It's just that whether the batter can see it specifically. And then with slower balls, so most slower balls, I would say well over 90% of slower balls are picked. And you don't always get that when you're listening to the commentary. But let me grab my ball. All right. That's a seam up delivery, right? And so my hand is going to come back behind the ball. If I'm bowling an off cutter, my hand is going to go around the ball like that. My fingers are going to have to come around the ball at a certain pitch. If I'm bowling a leg cutter, they're going to have to go that way. If it's back of the hand, I probably can't do this with my broken arm. I'll do it with my non-broken arm. It is literally back of the hand that it's coming out the top of the fingertips of. Knuckleball's a little bit different, which is why I go back to the 90%. You can see it. I think that's a traditional knuckleball grip. You can see my fingers are a little bit weirder, but actually, some people bowl it also like that. But either way, it does look a little bit different than that, but not massively. So knuckleball is the one that probably gets picked the least. And if you're really good with a leg cutter and you can just sort of come over the backside of it without making your fingers obvious, sometimes you can do that. Most slow balls are not picked. It's just that the revolution on the ball makes the ball do something very different. And if you're set up for a ball at 80 miles an hour and it's now at 67 miles an hour and it's dipping and it might be spinning and it may swing away slightly or fade away or not do what you want, or in the case of a knuckleball, it feels like the knuckleball goes like this. And that's because all cricket deliveries have backspin on them or topspin on them. The knuckleball has no rotations forward or backwards. So it feels different to any other ball. So from that perspective, it's very hard to actually hide it. What you're trying to do, though, is I probably won't be able to do it with a knuckleball, but you try, let's say you're holding the knuckleball. If you run in like that, they will see it. Right? So what you want to be able to do is hold your fingers across like that. And then as you come up, change it. Right? And so you do it either in your gather or whichever part of your action you can do. We know there are bowlers who can't do that because we've already seen Sunil Narine and Sikandar Raza have hide the ball behind their back. So they're obviously running in a bit more worried about that change. But and with, I should say with knuckleballs, people are probably less likely to do it. But you do see some bowlers change it. Was it Muhammad Asif, Stuart Clark thing where they used to be able to change it from an outswinger to an in swinger by flicking the ball up in the air. There are little things like that. So more often than not, the batter does have a very good idea of what the ball is coming out. What they can't predict is how many revolutions are on it, how much it's going to drop, and everything else. But you also don't want them to know beforehand, because if you're bowling at 90 miles an hour and they can tell you're going to bowl a slower ball 2 or 3 steps out, they'll be able to do that. But that is what top level batters do, right? So we all the scientific tests have told us that we shouldn't be able to face bowling at 90 miles an hour or even 85 miles an hour. And even at 80 miles an hour, we should struggle with it. And the reason that we have the ability to do this is that top level batters aren't actually reacting to the ball. They're reacting to the bowler and then their flight path of the first, I think it's 3 meters of the ball. So they're looking at the field. They're thinking about the pitch. They're thinking about what kind of bowler this is, where the ball is going to come from. Then they're hopefully getting a tip as he runs in or a tip as the ball comes out of his hand. When the ball comes out of his hand, that first 3 meters, they basically make a decision on what that ball is going to be. So even if they pick the off cutter, if just before the off cutter is delivered, they're not actually ready for that off cutter, they'll still be maybe in the wrong position, or they might lose their shape or whatever else. All of those things are still available to them. And then they do this thing called a saccade, where they see the first 3 meters and then they move their eyes to where they think the ball is now going to go based on that first 3 meter path. And we've done tests with top level international batters by turning the lights out. Don't do that at home. Not with a cricket ball anyway. And the best test, of course, is that if someone bowls at 90 miles an hour, a top level international batter will get behind it and defend it. And if you do the same ball with a coming out of a bowling machine, no one in the world can get in the right position quick enough. So we know that they're reading everything from the bowler and everything else on the way in. So I would say that most slow balls, probably by the time the ball has come out of the fingers, someone would know that is what it is. The knuckleball is the only one I think at the moment is a little bit harder to pick than other deliveries. But this is what top level batters do. And a lot of this is subconscious. When you talk to them, they can't explain exactly what they are doing. But it's what we've worked out from doing scientific tests on them. Well, that got weird and deep, Kyle. Thank you for that question. Manor says, Finch is a terrible bat who should never have been in the team. Well, he's not a terrible bat, is he? He might be in terrible form now. He's quite clearly not a terrible bat. You think sandpaper and his resultant captaincy cost Australia a cup? Well, they won a World Cup under him. What are we talking about? Smith, Wade, Green, better than Finch. Living off centuries in 100 T20I. Living off 2 centuries in 100 T20I. I mean, he was the number 1 ranked T20I batter in the world for like ages. So he was a fantastic T20I batter. Plus, he dominated T20 cricket around the world. It's been one of, he's played for every IPL franchise, I think. I think he's played for some of the IPL franchises that don't exist. He's a fantastic player. Australia won a World Cup with him as captain. You're right. I don't think he captains if not for sandpaper, although I don't know where they would have gone anyway with Smith as a player captain. So that is, I'm not sure Smith even would have wanted that. And they were already a bit unsure. And obviously Finch had captained in T20 cricket before Sandpaper Gate as well. Trying to think back to the full position there. So they'd already thought about him before. Look, he was in bad form this tournament. I mean, you say Smith is better. Would Smith have scored that much more? He probably would have scored at a similar rate to Finch. Let's be honest. That's the kind of player that he is. Wade, as an opener, certainly could have done that, but I don't think they would have wanted Wade to open in this tournament because of what happened in the last tournament and because what they've been pushing him towards is getting him to be that number 7 player, of which they also spent ages looking for. Like Tim David and Matthew Wade is probably the first time that they've been able to get that level of hitting talent and consistency available to them in those slots. And then you've got Green. Well, Green has a strike rate of 108 before a month before this tournament, right? He wasn't even in the squad. How could you have picked him in the squad at that stage? He'd never made any runs in T20 cricket in his professional career. He hadn't played the game enough as well. He didn't know what he was doing. Once they'd made the squad, obviously, they tried to bring Green in, and eventually he made it for the last game. Aaron Finch isn't the reason they lost this World Cup, though. They lost this World Cup, or they're out of this World Cup, because New Zealand completely destroyed them in that first game. They never really got back into it with a net run rate. That's why they were out of this World Cup. But they were scratchy all the way through. Their bowling was terrible. But yeah, the idea that Finch cost them a World Cup when literally they won a World Cup under him. I would say, all things considered, they should have won this tournament, or should have been they should have been a really big chance of winning this tournament. And the last one, when they had no idea what they were doing and changing their team midway through, they didn't know what the setup was. Mitch Marsh was there by accident. All these things were happening. That's the one that they probably shouldn't have won. But it's a random tournament. So that's how these things happen. Anyway, we're going to take another break, and I will go back through the comments and just see if there's anything else worth having a chat about.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app, and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
All right, let me just get a couple more questions. And all right, let's throw that one in as well. All right, let's see what we've got to finish up here. So that was Manners' question, wasn't it? Rahul says, why did you say 10.5 batter with respect to Milan? Milan did his groin. That was weird. It's also changed my camera position. Anyway, what did Rahul say? He said, why did you say 10.5 batters with respect to Milan? So Milan did his groin and injured himself there. And especially if he could hit and it was a pitch for hitting, I think that would be fine. But being that it didn't seem particularly easy to hit at the end there, I would suggest that that's probably why they didn't send him in, because he couldn't run properly, is my guess. Let me just get to my proper questions here. Maverick says, how much difference does it make having Bairstow, Archer, and Topley? Do you think their strength and depth is more important? Do you think strength and depth is more important than having 11 strong players? Yeah, I mean, so obviously Sri Lanka was probably more heavily hit by injuries, but I don't think even a full-strength Sri Lanka would have made it. I'm trying to think. Pakistan had Saman. Am I missing anyone else? I think they were pretty close to full strength. India was missing Bumrah and Jadeja, which I think probably had a bigger impact on their team than the 3 injuries for England, just because of the way those 2 players fit into that particular team. New Zealand. Am I missing anyone with New Zealand? I can't think of anyone. New Zealand might be the full strength team, and South Africa are missing Pretorius. I feel like I'm missing one other. They're missing someone else as well. Rassie. Pretorius and Rassie. All right. So if you look at it from South Africa's point of view, not having Rassie, I'm not sure that they can completely cover that. And it's part of the reason that, they're going to have to try someone, a Heinrich Klaassen and Stubbs in those sorts of positions. You'd probably rather have Rassie in that side and the other batters move down one spot, and then one of Stubbs or Klaassen not in the team. So that's hard for them to overcome. Pretorius takes away their flexibility if they ever want to play with an all-rounder and change their lineup a little bit. So they almost had to fully commit to this style of play, unless they went with Pef Laqueo for a game. I don't think I'm missing anyone else as far as their all-rounders are going. Jadeja is a much better bat than Akshar Patel. Probably a smarter bowler. Maybe not as good against the right-handers, but maybe more adept at being handy against the left-handers, and is a slightly better fielder than Akshar. But although, to be fair, as we saw the other day, Akshar's also a brilliant fielder as well. But I think he just makes the batting look a little more solid. And then Bumrah changes India's death bowling from, hopeful to very strong. If you look at the Bairstow one, so England had a backup opener who maybe is not quite as good as Bairstow, but he's been one of the best players in the world. So there's no real problem there. Perhaps though, if they were going to make that move, Hales and Bairstow in the same team is better, but I don't think they would have done that. So I think we have to be realistic there. Archer, I think Archer is the reason they won the 2019 World Cup, because I just think their bowling was too weak beforehand. So he was absolutely huge. It's been so long since we've seen him that at this stage, we're almost getting to the point of, I think people have probably forgotten how good he was. I think in this particular team, if he takes the spot of Wokes, they're a much better team. And then Topley, look, I think Topley's good, but they've probably got more out of Sam Curran in this particular lineup. And would Topley have been in the team if Archer was there anyway? I'm trying to think. And would Sam Curran have been in the team? Who's been really well. So I'm not really sure from that perspective. But yeah, it would be different. It would be different for all those teams. And sometimes you have your full strength team and a couple of those players are not in form, or the match of it, it doesn't work anyway. So you do have those situations. I think we'll see more and more, though, that strength and depth will be very important. And it's probably going to be most important for Australia, England, and India. Perhaps South Africa as well, and Pakistan. But it's going to be really hard for those other teams. If you were to look at New Zealand, let's take out 3 players from New Zealand. Let's say Finn Allen was not available, Lockie Ferguson was not available, and Trent Bolt was not available. Would we be talking about New Zealand the way that we are now? And I think that's where it makes a huge difference for those kinds of results and injuries. And look, everyone's going to get injuries, and these things happen at major World Cups. I think it's unlucky that England have been hit by injuries in both, but they might just have the ability to get past it this time in a way that the last time it just felt like there was no one fit left to play, and they were just bringing people over, hoping that it would work. So, but it's a very interesting one. I hope I haven't missed any major injuries and all that. Oren says, do you think these 100 to 130 strike rates, which happen to coincide with a win, are overvalued by the media and non-analysts? Yes, maybe not so much in this World Cup, just because it's been a low-scoring World Cup, and quite often the innings that has kept the side together has been far more important than it would be in a normal form of T20. I think that's probably fairly fair to say. So I think in that perspective, it maybe not in this case, but yeah, generally. So I was having a look at some of the Player of the Match awards. There's some really ordinary innings that have been Player of the Match when some much better players have not been. And so I think we still naturally go to, he scored the most runs, so he must be the best player. And we've now got, I think we've got plenty of that. But I think as T20 goes, we're understanding more and more that that's not the case. I mean, the conversation about Rizwan and Baba is pretty good conversation to have, right? I wonder if we would have been having that conversation 5 or 10 years ago. In 1992, in 2012, I think everyone would be saying that Pakistan had the best opening partnership in the world. And people aren't saying that anymore. They're saying it's the most consistent and it's the most solid. And those two things are true. They're not saying it's automatically the best. And or certainly not everyone is saying that. And so I do think that people have changed the way that they think about that. You look at some of the discourse around the Indian team. But with a lot of casual fans, we probably haven't trained them up to really understand what T20 cricket is. But there's no doubt that I think people are getting smarter. But then when you throw a World Cup in like this, it's a little bit more confusing. Last question for today. Surosh Alam says, what in your opinion will Netherlands have to do? What in your opinion Netherlands will have to do to have a chance against South Africa on Sunday? Well, look, they've got Glover. I'm assuming Bas de Leader is going to bowl again. So Glover, Bas de Leader, Van Beek, Van Meekeren, and Klaassen, right? Van Meekeren's current bowling, he could probably play for a major team. He's bowled that well in this tournament. Klaassen, Van Beek, sort of, canny, smart bowlers, very skillful. The pitch gives them anything. They can certainly do something there. I'm missing someone in that. Glover, I still think Glover's really good, but he hasn't kicked on the way I thought he would. But he certainly has the ability to take wickets in clumps when he does take them. And Bas de Leader, I think, has the second or third most wickets in this tournament. I'm not completely sure that those numbers would hold up over a long period of time, but at the moment he's taking a lot of wickets. That's how they win. They have to make. I almost think they have to bat first. They have to bat first and make 150 runs, which I'm not sure they can. So maybe let's say 135 runs and then take a bunch of wickets. I'm not sure that Adelaide is the ideal place for them to play against South Africa. But if they would make 135 to 155, and one of the two of their bowlers get on a heater, South Africa don't have a deep batting lineup, right? So if you want the truth on that, if they can do that, I think if South Africa bat first, they won't be under the same kind of pressure. And the minute they go past 145, I find it hard to believe that the Netherlands will chase that based on how the Netherlands bat, specifically how they chase at times. I really don't think they have the ability to score that many runs. Surosh, if you're a Pakistani fan, I don't know if you want it off the top of my head. Someone asked on Twitter the other day. I said it's probably a 10% chance that Netherlands win that game. And I might be being slightly optimistic, but I'm basing that on how well the Netherlands have taken wickets, and also specifically that South Africa, of all the batting lineups, don't have that incredibly deep batting lineup. So that if you do, I know Van Meekeren takes a couple early on, and then de Leader takes 2 wickets in an over out of nowhere. If he's bowling, he may not bowl after being hit in the head. But if they manage to do that, they give themselves, I think, a very, very good opportunity to put some pressure on South Africa. But it's obviously massively unlikely. If you said to me Netherlands could win 1 out of 10 of those games, with their batting, it's 1 out of 20, so it might be a 5% chance. I'm not sure, but it's not very likely, no, if that's what you're looking for. Big thanks to everyone for coming on again and chatting to me. I will be back tomorrow. Big day tomorrow. We got we got 3 games on tomorrow. So we'll try and be back at the same time, but sometimes when we have so many games, things get delayed a little bit. 99.94, I think there's an episode on Australia and why they struggled at this World Cup. You can listen to Melinda Farrell and Banner Sundaresan there. Plenty of other great podcasts around as well. My Wagon Wheel podcast was really interesting this week, if you want to find that on the Red Inca feed, and then everything that we put up on YouTube. We've got the Pakistan video, which if you're a Pakistan fan, I'm not really sure is for you. It may be a video specifically not for Pakistani fans, but I thought it was quite interesting having a look at those 3 losses on the trot that basically cost them 2 World Cups. And I'm working on some other stuff as well, so keep an eye out. Follow 99.94 all the places you can. And remember to comment and hit the little bell icon and subscribe and everything else. You know, the more support we get on YouTube, the more videos we can make, basically, at the end of the day. So thank you all, and I'll see you again tomorrow.